Welcome, Exiles, to my thick Tectonic Slam Juggernaut, a character that has a lot of endurance charges, a lot of tank, and basically no damage. It does like a million, it's not good. This video is basically just to tell you guys about the build I made and say, hey, don't make this exactly the way I did, because I made a bad build. I always hate doing this because it's a bit embarrassing to showcase a build that's like complete hot garbage, but on the bright side, we learned some things, and we know now in the future. Next time we tell ourselves endurance charge stacking will be fine and we'll do damage, we can think to ourselves, no, that's not true. We won't do damage unless maybe we pick a better skill or, I don't know, some miracle of God occurs. Now, this whole character started simply because I was inept at making a ring with power charges on it. What ended up happening is I was basically recombinating rings. I lost all of my currency, and I was just trying to make some budget rings, because at this point I was down to like 5x and couldn't afford another power charge ring gamble. And when I was doing that, I combined a ring with T1 Wed with another ring, and I got an endurance charge on it, basically out of spite, just to say, hey, screw you, you suck, or whatever. And I found out endurance charges are only worth 20C a ring, 20C or whatever, so I decided, you know what? I will YOLO it with the synthesized ring, because those were only like a couple X, and I could actually afford to buy one of those, unlike the power charge rings, which I couldn't afford. Moral of the story is, I made a +2 endurance charge ring with some pretty cool prefixes. I obviously haven't finished the suffixes on this ring. This build is nowhere near good enough to be worth the time and effort to farm and make, upgrades to the gear at this point. I'm just like, okay, I got a 2 plus endurance charge ring. I want to make a build around specifically in attacks and endurance charge stacking. And my goal originally was to be a 17 endurance charge build, which is what I had theorized as the max for the amount of endurance charges I could get to. Well, you'll see right now I'm only at 15, and that's because I tried to make a staff, an eventuality rod with a shaper mod, +1 endurance charge. This would get us to 17. You'll see we're at 16 right now with this eventuality rod on. Moral of the story is that went horrifically wrong as well. I lost all my currency, and I decided to buy a couple nebuluses for 20C a pop. Now, this character ultimately, due to nebuluses and how they give you a ridiculous amount of armor and base percentile mitigation elemental damage, this character ends up being quite tanky, because the whole theory on this build was I was going to go for endurance charge stacking to get my phys reduction capped out with 15 endurance charges and the Juggernaut Ascendancy Node Unrelenting. That's 75% physical damage reduction. With just a Watcher's Eye, you get another 8%, takes you to 83%. Ultimately, I was planning to have 17 endurance charges, get all the way to 90% phys reduction. But with 83% phys reduction and a Soul of Tukahamo, if I'm just standing there, stationary, hammering at a boss, I'm going to get all the way to 90% phys reduction. This allows us to have a character that has 90% phys reduction while also going for transcendence and stacking a lot of armor. We get up to about 100k armor. If I pop Molten Shell, it goes higher. Yada, yada, yada. Point is, with transcendence, with 78 max res, with lore weave, we end up being very, very, very tanky to one-shots because we have so much mitigation for phys already with just endurance charges, and then we have a lot of mitigation from transcendence and the mitigation you get from that. Unfortunately, the big issue with going for endurance charge stacking versus something like frenzy or power charge stacking is those other two charges give you damage, and usually there's some level of synergy where you have a character or an ascendancy that comes with damage. And unfortunately, Juggernaut just isn't really one of those unless you're doing like accuracy stacking. You get a little bit of damage from unyielding, but 8% per charge really isn't enough to carry. And then the fact you have a charge that's based around defenses and an ascendancy based around defenses, it means it's really, really hard to get damage. Now, I tried to get some damage in here with going for Leadership's Price, basically getting 15 crit on bosses, basically making it so we could go as a crit capped build along with Scorch, stuff like that, basically matching our attributes between int and strength. And this, I was on so much copium just telling myself this will fix the build, because originally I was playing the build without the leadership's price, so I had no brittle, I had no scorch, so my crit was basically like 30%. It was terrible. Once I got brittle into the build, it goes all the way up to basically 100% crit chance. Moral of the story is, I was high on copium, and I was telling myself, once I get crit, the damage will be fine. Unfortunately, I got leadership's price in the build, and the damage still wasn't very good. We're dealing roughly around 1 million to like 1.5, and then if we get berserk by some miracle, if we've stunned a boss, we can go all the way up to like 2 or something. Ultimately, its damage just isn't very good. The character is, besides our rings and our boots, is relatively cheap, I would say, just because Nebulocks aren't very expensive, and my helmet and gloves and belt are relatively easy made with recombinators without too much cost. But then it gets more expensive once you start trying to make double endurance charge rings and double endurance charge boots. That stuff greatly jacks up the price, and for this price, this character is barely better than a League Star character with potato day 1 gear sort of thing. Doing 1 million damage is quite abysmal. Granted, we are very tanky, but there's just a certain point of, no matter how tanky you are, the build is not redeemable, because if you just don't deal that much damage and it just takes a while to kill bosses, especially this late in the league, it's just not a good build. And that's something I have to accept. Ultimately, I would tack this up to, I wasn't able to get enough attack speed in the build. My weapons and my base flat damage I deal is relatively low. Nebulocks are a pretty low phys-based weapon, so our flat damage kind of sucks. Our base damage sucks. And then on top of that, we just weren't really able to get that much scaling in terms of crit multi and percent damage, I would say, because of our tree being relatively invested into min-maxing endurance charges, and endurance charges just don't come with that much damage. Hopefully that breaks down the character decently well. I'll go ahead and showcase a map with it real quick. The reason I chose to do a Tectonic Slam specifically is because Tectonic Slams comes with a 5% more AoE per endurance charge. This means, and it also has an extra branching chance per endurance charge. This means with our 15 endurance charges, we have 75% more AoE. This pairs with the Juggernaut AoE from Unyielding and the AoE from this small node here. Meaning with our endurance charges, when we're mapping, we actually have some pretty large slams that go branching all the way across the screen. I specifically got the Celestial MTX for Tectonic Slam because I thought it looked cool. But ultimately, it was a waste of $10 worth of points, and I probably shouldn't have done it, considering Tectonic Slam just really isn't a very strong skill, in my opinion. I probably could make this character a decent amount stronger DPS-wise just by swapping this skill. But one of those things is a thing I didn't want to do because, you know, the whole reason I was building the character is to be endurance charge stacking, and I wanted to meme around with Tectonic Slam, right? So I will go ahead and do, I don't know, let's do a Hunter, I guess. Hunter, or we could do, let's do, I think I haven't done any, I want to say I haven't done any, of these fights for Maven Influence. Yeah, I haven't. So we'll go ahead and do a, what is this, an Enslaver? Yeah, an Enslaver. We'll do an Enslaver as a showcase, just to give you guys, this is future editing the video, Lance, and it's during editing that I realized that I am a complete moron. I decided to showcase you guys a map with the mod Monsters Steal Power, Frenzy, and Endurance charges on hit, which means every single time I get hit, I lose all my endurance charges, which is all of my sustain, or all my sustain and all my defenses. And not only is that get much worse, Nebulocks will still deal a bunch of self-damage to my character when I get hit based on the 15 charges I had before I get hit. You'll see how this affects my character, but it makes a lot more sense now why I die in the map the way I do, and you're going to see, but I just wanted to cut this in here to say I made some mistakes, and it'll make sense more when you see the showcase. Anyways, getting back to the video. As an idea what this build looks like mapping. I mean, it's fine for mapping, but ultimately the damage is just way too low to do any sort of bossing or stuff like that. I had fun with the project, trying to put it all together, just being like, okay, let's build around endurance charges, but ultimately, it was just a bad build, and I have to go to sleep knowing that, and that's how it is sometimes. I often get comments that say, oh, wow, you make really good builds, yada, 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 I could never do this. But I want to be clear here, and part of the reason I am making this video is to showcase I make some hot garbage on a fairly regular basis. I definitely would like to showcase, hey, when I make failures, when I make bad builds, it happens. And part of this is a solution where if I was willing to make the character in path of building and be like, okay, it's only going to deal this much damage, I don't even need to spend my time making the character. And there could be scenarios like that where I decide, you know what, because I know going into it it's not going to deal the damage, I'm not going to play the character. But this is one of my own personal preference sort of thing. I don't enjoy the game if I already know the answer to how good X character is going to be. I don't play the game to make the most optimized, perfect version of the build, make it in path of building, and then make it in the game. I play the game to experiment with ideas and just be like, okay, that sounds like a fun thing to do, and then just go do it, you know, actually play the character out. Even though I'll make failures or whatever, I learn a lot in the process in terms of there are things that PUB won't be able to describe to you in terms of quality life or how fun the build will feel to play, stuff like that. And then just ultimately, it's sort of a journey. And then if I went to POB, I wouldn't be able to be so extremely high on... Wait, what the hell did I just die to?
Mortal flesh is so fallible.
I gotta be honest, did he ignite me? He probably ignited me, in all honesty, if I was a betting man. I'm honestly surprised I died. I wasn't really paying attention. I would guess he ignited me. We have that's another thing I should say. We have a significant weakness to ignites, because I'm not ailment immune at all, and transcendence won't apply to an ignite. So we mitigate basically regular hits very, very well, but then our tankiness kind of ends there the second we get ignited, and yeah, we're getting ignited. So Enslaver was a poor choice to showcase this character, obviously. I'm not going to go back in there because I think he's going to just keep killing me with ignite. So that's another scenario of, hey, this character is tanky, but it's actually not tanky in this scenario where you're fighting somebody who's fire-based. This is obviously a scenario where we'd want to get, we would simply want to get ignite immunity or more sustain. For our character, we actually have a decent amount of sustain. We have 1500 regen per second. Unfortunately, Nebulox, although they make you very tanky to one-shots, they come with a pretty hefty downside of 200 damage per second per endurance charge, and with 2 Nebulox, that's like 6k fire damage per second. It gets mitigated with 78 fire res, so it goes down to like around 1300 fire damage per second we're taking. So although we regen 1500, if we get hit, we're only regenerating 200 life per second. We have life leech from Tech Slam, so that helps mitigate more damage, but still, if you get hit with a decent ignite, we're obviously not going to have enough sustain for that, and that's just a flaw of the character I made, and I'm okay showing that. I don't mind that. I want to be as, what's the word, transparent about the issues or problem cases for builds I make, and this hopefully gives you an idea of, hey, I made something, this was the idea I had, and this is the shortcomings that came with it. It's how it goes sometimes when you play PoE. Regardless, I still had a lot of fun making the character. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video of a showcase of how to not make a good build, or an example of a build that there was some thoughts behind it, but obviously I didn't have enough foresight or whatever going into it to be like, you know, this build's probably going to have issues with single target, or this build's going to have issues with sustaining Nebulock. Sort of things like that, where a better player would be able to go into making this build and be like, you know what, before we even make this build, I could already see some problems going on here for these things in the future. And in future builds I make, if I try to plan around Nebulox again, I'll know, hey, that degen's a really big downside. If we're going to put this into the character, we have to have a very high upside in sustain to be able to mitigate that self-damage from Nebulox. Stuff like that makes sense a lot. Makes sense to me, at least. So, anyways, as always, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Take care, Exiles. I'll see you in the next one.